Hello, everybody, and welcome to Getting Inside the Right Male Mind. I'm Lisa Shield,
And I'm Benjamin Shield.
and it's wonderful to see you. Hi, babe.
Hi, sweetheart.
Thank you once again for doing this. Always so appreciate it. You are such a gift, not only to me, but to everyone who tunes into this podcast, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. For me, it's fun.
Oh, babe,
it's
thank
a
you.
pleasure to be here.
That's wonderful to hear. Well, today I think we have a wonderful subject, and one that is something that almost all women deal with when they're dating. Today we're going to look at the question, is your anxiety causing you to push men away? And this can be on a date or even in a relationship. And it's really an important thing. I know that when I dated, it was excruciating for me managing my anxiety, because I think looking back, every time I sat across from a man on a date, it was like being rejected by my father all over again. And I know a lot of women will relate to that. We feel all of those rejections, and not even just from our fathers, but from all the men in our lives that we feel rejected by or hurt by. There's so much fear and anxiety around, what do I say? Am I good enough? Am I pretty enough? Am I slim enough? Am I smart enough? It's agonizing. Yeah. Was it ever like that for you?
Oh, sure. And, fortunately, if I were dating now, hypothetically, I'd have much more tools than I had then. But, back then, I'd maybe buy a new shirt, or I'd look in the mirror 20 times, and I'd comb my hair, like a dozen times just to get it right, and men have a lot of anxiety because men have to prove themselves as safe, and worthy, and so, men may have anxiety about over talking, about, talking about themselves, about what they do, the things that they have and all that, things that seems superficial, and they are, but it's because they've got the anxiety of trying to prove themselves to the woman sitting across.
So you struggled also with, am I enough?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And it's challenging managing that. I mean, sometimes we can have a cocktail on a date and forget ourselves and get into the flow, right?
Yeah.
But it's not just the anxiety on the date, but it's also what we see a lot with our clients is the anxiety after the date. What happens once the date is over, and then that's really when the real anxiety comes in. Why isn't he texting? What should I say? Did I do the right things? Should I have said that? Should I have done this? And then it's almost in the reliving of the date, and waiting for that follow-up text and wondering if the guy will ask them out again. I mean, there's all that anxiety. Did you feel that as well?
Well, being the guy, I was usually the one that responded. So, but I was always like online dating. If I, contacted someone, I kept checking the computer, and to see if they responded, and it was very, I was on 3 sites. And it was crazy making because I'd go from one side to the other. It became very addictive. And instead of being pleasurable and fun, it just brought up a lot of anxiety.
Yeah. And one of the things that a lot of the women in our course will say in the first month, there's no dating because we really want to hit the reset button and give them some powerful new tools so that when they get back out into the dating world, they can do it differently. And one thing that they report quite frequently is that it's much more fun once they get back out there. But for most of us who are not doing an intensive 12-week emotionally naked dating course, right? We're going out there and it isn't fun. It's excruciating for us. And especially when there's one bad date after another that doesn't go anywhere, or we get 4 dates in and get ghosted again, it just feels like wash, rinse, repeat. And there's that builds up, it mounts. And so that even exacerbates the anxiety. So one of the main reasons I wanted to talk about this subject, and we want to be very clear that this is going on both sides, but most of our audience and certainly all of our clients who do our course are women. Single, intelligent, beautiful, successful women who have accomplished, much of what they want in life. They're career women. They are able to do almost anything else they put their minds to except this. And it is demeaning. It feels awful for a woman who has been so successful in every other part of her life to suddenly find herself feeling like a 15-year-old schoolgirl when she goes out on a date with a successful man who she really wants to impress. And I want to explore, babe, what it's like for a man to be on the receiving end of our anxiety.
Well, it brings up the man's anxiety also. I mean, when someone has a high level of energy and when a person, and I'll just say a woman, but I'm referring to both men and women. When a woman is anxious on a date, it takes her from her heart to her head. And so the conversation is usually superficial, sometimes silly, sometimes inconsequential. And the date is going nowhere. And it's just, at the end of the date, it was just a miserable experience, or at least not a nourishing experience for both people.
Or it puts her into business mode where, she's talking about work, or she's talking about trying to impress the man, right? She gets very masculine. And in the same way that a man tries to impress a woman on a date and talks a lot about himself and his accomplishments, a lot of women today who are anxious or nervous or trying to impress a man and show a man that she doesn't need him, she gets in her head and she can start doing the same kinds of things and come across as very masculine. And that's a turnoff.
When we look at the most romantic movies over the last many, many decades, the most romantic women are the women who are totally present, who are speaking slowly, who are looking into a man's eyes, who are in contact both with their heart and their head. And they're really, the man feels like she's just enjoying all 5 senses as she's talking to him.
Yeah. And she's engaged and she's connected. We call this bell jarring.
Right.
We call it bell jarring, where it's almost like there's a bell jar, a glass bell jar over the two of them. And the woman is so present and she's really hearing every word and she's responding and enjoying the conversation and the moment and, really reflecting the man's masculinity back to him, not just with her words, but with her gestures, with her eyes, right? She's responsive and connected. But when we're anxious, what does that all look like and feel like to a man?
Well, it feels like there's no there, because you don't really get to know a person when they're highly anxious. You just know their anxiety. And, you're just waiting for things to settle down. hopefully, so that there could be some vulnerability. And that's how dates progress into a second date and beyond and into relationships.
Yeah.
When there's even, because one has to be in their heart to be truly vulnerable. And it means that one doesn't have to be totally vulnerable, particularly on a first date, but offer a little vulnerability from the heart, see how it's received and responded to, and then things begin to build on that, so it becomes one of those magical evenings where two people share themselves.
Yeah. And when I think about vulnerability, something that I would really want our audience to know, there are many, many kinds of vulnerability. There is me sharing parts of my history that I feel were not my best moments, or things that hurt me, right? Moments in my life where I may have felt that I wasn't being my best self, or things that you may judge me for, right? That were my least flattering moments. But there is also a different kind of vulnerability that I think a lot of people miss. And that's the vulnerability where I show you how I feel about you. And I want you to like me and to want to get to know me. And I share with you those things. I like you. I'm enjoying this conversation. I really feel a connection with you that I don't often feel with other men. That kind of vulnerability, when it comes to romance and connection, in some ways is the biggest risk of all, right? Because you don't know if that person likes you or wants to get to know you. And so that's a kind of vulnerability that often doesn't get shared, or that many people don't understand. And that's the realness in heart-to-heart connection that we're looking for. But getting there and being able to do that authentically and nakedly, right, is a challenge for most people. And that's where the anxiety comes in. So what drives the anxiety? What is it that's driving us to be so anxious on dates?
I think that it's the fear of being judged by the other person.
Yep.
It's the feeling of this internal feeling of not being enough. And sometimes when we're really attracted to someone, the more attraction we have, the more anxiety we have. And for some people, it's just a hard thing to get over. You know, it's much easier for some people to be with someone who they're not that attracted to, because, you know, they just are more comfortable being, you know, at that level or above the other person. But when they're sitting across from someone that is like a knockout,
right,
and they're it's easy to trip over themselves, you know, just trying to prove that they're, you know, good enough for them. And it's a self-sabotaging exercise.
I actually had a client who was dating a very, very, very handsome, hot actor, top tier. And she is one of the most stunningly beautiful women I've ever known. But she was so nervous with him, and he really liked her. He was really, really into her. And she was so intimidated. And this is a woman who probably could have held her own with almost anybody. But she was out of her league there. And she said, I flunked this particular actor. And now she's with the most wonderful man who is, you know, a perfect match. They're just so well suited. But everybody has somebody who is going to feel, you know, where they're going to sit across from that person and get totally anxious and feel like, oh my God, I'm completely out of my league here.
And when you say out of the league, it's easy to feel that.
Yeah.
But the important thing is to realize we all are in our own league.
Right.
And which is interesting and fascinating in itself. And can really draw someone in if we're truly honest, vulnerable, and present with describing what our league is.
Yes.
We don't have to be in someone else's league to be out of their league.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, and one of the things that I became very clear about when I was dating, I had a very humbling heart to heart with myself. And I said, look, part of why you have so much anxiety in dating is not because you're not enough or you don't bring enough to the table to be with a fabulous guy who is going to inspire you for the rest of your life and all. I realized that I knew so little about this part of my life. I knew very little about men. I didn't know what men wanted from me other than sex. And I was so inexperienced when it came to men. And I think if most of us actually sit back and look at our love lives and how few relationships we've really had, how few intimate relationships. I mean, even if we've had many, it's still few, to be honest. And I thought, look, if I can date and date a lot of men and not worry, is this the perfect guy? Is this my future husband? Is he hunky? Am I totally turned on by him? But if I was willing to just sit across from men and get comfortable, letting down my walls, talking to them, learning how to engage with them, seeing what lit them up and watching their eyes and seeing where they would pull away, right? I could see how much conversation was too much conversation. I could look in their eyes and see when I'm doing this, they light up. And when I'm doing this, that light dims. And so I started to watch this and see the impact of my behavior on men. And it built confidence. It built ease and confidence. And it became easier for me to start to be authentic with men on dates.
And I think even in addition to being authentic, being playful, because anxiety destroys playfulness, destroys playfulness. And what a man wants in a relationship and what a woman wants is, to be with someone for depth and connection and all of those things, romance, but to have someone to have fun with.
Yeah.
And to picture that, wow, it's going to be fun 20 years from now. 40, maybe 40 years from now, it's going to be fun. So you want to see that on a date. And if someone comes into a date anxious, there's no playfulness. And the guy comes home from the date and says, wow, that really, I don't think that was a match.
Well, and they're going to say, this feels like it's going to be work.
Yes.
Work. And that is a big deal, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's a big deal. I don't say this with any judgment. I look at so many women, and myself included. Please know, I include myself in this. We can be a lot of work for men. We can be a lot of work. And sometimes, especially in the beginning, men are drawn in by women who are fun and playful and know how to flirt. And, they have that gift of playfulness, but they can do that in the beginning. And then as the relationship goes on and the man now has bought in and he's into the relationship, then it flips. And he starts to see the anxiety and this happens, in the beginning when there's no expectations in a relationship. It's all fun and light, and it can be playful with some women. Have you had situations? You're raising an eyebrow where you met a woman and you thought, "Wow, there's promise here. This looks great." And then you found yourself a month or two into the relationship and you were like, whoa.
Oh yeah. It's hell.
Mm-hmm.
I just put it simply. And in the beginning, we think about the romance. You know, we think about the possibility of touch and intimacy and the first kiss and all of that. And it's easy to ignore, signs of anxiety. And when that first blush wears off, and what's left is someone who is anxious throughout the day or anxious with them or it's so difficult to connect. And if a woman is anxious, she could be withdrawn, which means that a man has to work to create intimacy.
Can you talk about that? Because that is a big deal.
Absolutely. Or she can be speaking too much just out of anxiety, and he feels more like an audience. So, but...
Well, I know there's been very few instances, and we've never had fights in our relationship, but I remember one instance where, something happened, and I knew we were just on different sides of this particular issue, and I needed a little time just to let my feelings go, to let my mood, wash away. But you came into my office and you asked me 3 times. You said, "Would you like to talk about this?" And then you said, "Would you like to talk about it?" And you said, "Would you like to talk about it?" And then you said, "I'll be in my office." Right? But some women play that game where they will pull, they're mad, they're angry, they try to hook you into, they're anxious and they're itching for a fight or a discussion or whatever. And then they pull away, they withdraw, and they want a man to come after them.
Right. And it gets exhausting. Exhausting. And there's no benefit for the guy.
Right.
He's just like, oh man, this is work. Or sometimes they don't even know what they did wrong. And I think that's in dating also, that a guy, that 2 people may have a wonderful date, and the woman may be looking at her iPhone, waiting for a text, within a few minutes after the date. It could be a day, it could be 2 days, which is huge, can be anxiety producing for some people. And the guy is just, he said, "Oh, that was a great date. But I got to get some work done, or I've got kids or whatever it might be." And they're on 2 different clocks.
Yeah.
And for the guy, it's just like a natural flow. Oh, we had a great date on Saturday. I'll write her on Monday, or Tuesday, and just see if she wants to go out again. And the woman is saying he hasn't written. And
if
what
he
do I
really
do?
liked me, he'd be chasing me. And how long does it take to write a text? He knows I'm thinking about him and I would want to hear from him.
And what text should I write to get him to write?
Right. Do I wait for him to write me, or do I write him? And I mean, he's got a life.
Yeah.
He may have, he may be a lawyer and he's got a case that he's working on, or he may have kids and be with his kids over the weekend, or have something come up that he needs to deal with his ex. But, he's got a life. He's not just sitting there thinking about the date and you and all.
And he may be thinking about the date, but he may just, be thinking that, oh, I'll write her, in a couple days and that'll be great.
Yeah.
Because that's what we do with guy friends. I mean, 2 male friends, it would be rare for 2 regular guys to, if they say, well, let's do this again. And, for the guy, both guys to be looking at their iPhones, waiting for, it's like, why hasn't he written?
That is so funny. And then if a woman is just messaging the guy, or messages too much or whatever, the guy starts to think what?
Oh, well, she's, really anxious. She's pushing for a relationship. She's moving this too quickly. You know, I want to date other women. You know,
And we had one date.
yeah, right, right.
Or we had 3 dates, or we only had 4 dates, right? Like a guy isn't sitting there going, oh my God, we had 4 dates. Like this could be a relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really off-putting. And we have some of our clients are calculating every single move. And there's that great Dave Barry piece about the difference between men and women. If anybody wants to look it up, it's a phenomenal piece. In fact, maybe one day we'll do a whole podcast on that. But it's basically, you know, women will go over and over and over and analyze every single thing he said and she said. And it's really wild to think how much work we put into this and how much we overthink it. Now let's go to us. We had one date, which was a wonderful date, a lovely date, a lovely date. And I knew that you were a standout guy. Like there was no question to me that I had just had a date with an absolutely extraordinary man. In fact, we even have a friend in common. And I called him and I said I had a date with Benjamin Shield. What can you tell me about him? And my friend said, he's a gem, right? And so then I went off to Vietnam for 3.5 weeks on business and to recover from a breakup I'd had. And I didn't hear a word from you, not one.
But I had marked it on my calendar the day that you were coming back. And I contacted you the day you came back.
But I knew none of that. And I will also add that you could have emailed me. I checked my emails during that time, but I didn't hear a word from you, not one thing. And I never messaged you.
Well, I probably wrote immediately after the date saying it was a wonderful date. But during those 3.5 weeks, I figured you've got a life. You know, you're off doing business in Vietnam. And I'll talk to you when you get back.
And I didn't have a clue. Like I thought all I did one time through the whole time I was there, I thought, I wonder if I'll hear from that Rolfer guy again. Benjamin is a Rolfer. You can Google that if you don't know what it is. And that was it. And then I came home to an email from you asking me out again.
Right. And then we were on the phone and we've been together ever since.
Well, actually, I turned the date down because that following weekend I was doing a workshop.
Oh, right.
Remember? Right. And I said, I don't think I can do it. I'm going to be doing this workshop all weekend. And then I rethought it.
Then I think you had a date with your former boyfriend somewhere in there, up in San Francisco.
Yeah, somewhere in there. I was flying up to San Francisco for the weekend. Not with he was not a former boyfriend at the time.
Current.
He was somebody that I was seeing, but he also was a confirmed bachelor and 20 years older than me. And I knew nothing was coming of that. I knew it was just a wonderful, beautiful, romantic friendship. And I had told him, I had said, I am dating other people. I'm looking for someone to share my life with. And if I meet somebody, you will be the first to know. And he was. But I came back and we went on that date, which was just magical. We closed the whole event. We went to an event at one of your clients' houses, and we closed the entire event down.
Yeah, we didn't even know that we were not only the last people there, but the catering company had removed all the chairs and tables, and they were just waiting for us to get up out of politeness.
Like we didn't even see them start to fold up the chair.
Yeah, they took away the buffets, everything.
Everything, and we were like this. But it was I didn't worry. I wasn't concerned. If I didn't think about it. And in fact, through the whole courtship, I never worried that you didn't call enough, or when is he going to call, or when am I going to see him again, or whatever. I never even thought about any of those things.
And I didn't feel anxiety in our dating process because you weren't anxious. You weren't flooding me with emails. This was before texting, or phone calls, or saying, well, can you only see me? Can you see me before Saturday? Because this isn't enough. And there was none of that. And we just let it progress. And the more we saw each other, the more it became a priority. And to the point where when I asked you to marry me, it was more of a formality because it progressed in a way that, well, of course we're going to get married. Of course we're going to get a house. Of course. And then I thought, oops, I forgot to propose.
Well, you didn't say, oops, I forgot to propose, because otherwise you very conveniently proposed on the first anniversary of our first date. And then we got married on the second anniversary of our first date. So, yeah, but you did at some point realize that.
Kind of after the fact.
Wow, it was so wonderful, and it had just progressed so beautifully and seamlessly, and we each wanted it.
Yeah, I think what happened was that I got your engagement ring, which was beautiful and antique-like, and it was my mom's diamond, and it was like a weekday, but it was, I think, the anniversary of our first date. And so I picked you up, not really telling you where we were going or that I had the ring. And we went back, it was a Monday, because we went back to where we had our first date, which is at a Thai restaurant, and they were closed.
That's right. Yeah. And so we went around the corner where, it was really lovely. But one thing I want to share was how I got there. Because like everybody else, I was an anxious dater. I was an avoidant. I could also be very avoidant. The men who really liked me, I pushed them away. And then the men I liked, I would get very anxious and I would pursue them. And most of the time, looking back, I think all of those men were not men I ever would have really wanted to be with, but they were unavailable. And what triggered my anxiety was not that I wanted to be with them. It's why didn't they want to be with me? That's I think the biggest trigger. And trying to get them to want to be with me. That's where the anxiety came from. Well, even though looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness, why was I ever even interested in those guys?
Well, I think part of the interest is knowing that we're enough, that the other person would be interested. And when they're not interested, it can be a reflection to that internal voice, that what we would call the frenemy in our head, that, oh my God, I'm not enough, not even for him.
Yeah. Like, why doesn't he want me?
Yeah.
And looking back, I mean, none of those guys were guys I would have ever wanted to be with.
Yeah.
But I was trying to get, to prove myself to these people. And it's very interesting in this whole arc of, looking at our enoughness and how we try to keep proving that we're good enough, right? One of the ways we've been talking about that I see this reflected in my own self is when I get a negative review, right, online.
Which is very rare.
Well, thanks, babe. But, in those moments, I had somebody who was angry that I advertise my work on Facebook and on Instagram, and those platforms are there for people to advertise. That's how they make their money, by the way. And I had, I'm running a very specific kind of ad. It's called an origin story ad. And in the ad, I talk about my own journey of how, what I went through to get here, to find the guardian of my soul. And somebody was so angry that my ad popped up in the midst of whatever she was watching. She was appalled. And then she said, and then she went on to do nothing but talk about herself. And why did I have to be subjected to this? And she posted, she actually went to Yelp and posted a negative review. Of course, Yelp will take it down because it doesn't talk about my business. But the idea was that I was so unfazed by this, and then there was another review as well that I actually happened to see from years ago that somehow I had missed, where somebody wasn't happy with my services. But I was able to look at those reviews and it didn't faze me. It didn't faze me. I felt compassion for those people, and I responded to what they'd written in a loving way. But it was so amazing and freeing not to be affected by this. And it makes me think about what was it? Because there was a point where that would have been weeks or months of anger and agony and how dare they, and I would have literally been upset by those things. And instead I went and read all of the wonderful reviews that people had written. And this is telling because we'll so often chase after that one person who doesn't want to be with us, doesn't like us, doesn't want us. And then there's this whole sea of people. There must have been, I have 29 reviews, and 27 of them were 5-star reviews of people just reporting glowing, beautiful things about me. But in dating, we'll miss all of that, right? And we'll be like, why don't these two people want to be with me? Why don't they like me? And that's what we do. It's a great example. And to see that switch. So I remember it's been a long journey. It's not something that we just get over, honey. And I think you have some techniques or you have some ideas about how women can start to manage their anxiety, how they can start to feel it in their body. Maybe you can share some of the ways for the women to actually start to calm themselves and get through this anxiety so that they don't bring it on a date.
Well, anxiety is often not being in the present. And it's, bringing things from the past or thinking about the future or feeling that there's going to be judgment. And so it's anything we can do to be in the moment, which would be experiencing all 5 senses, feeling ourselves in the chair, smelling the food, enjoying the taste, listening to the sound of the music in the background or to the person sitting across from us. All of an occasional touch on the shoulder or hand, all of those things bring us into the moment. And when we're present, it's very difficult to feel anxiety. We can feel excitement, which is really what we want, because often when people say they feel anxious about going into a date or being on a date, there's a very slight shift in perception where that anxiety can turn into excitement. And anxiety pulls people away from the present. It brings someone more internal and distant and dissociated, where excitement brings someone forward and engaging and very present. So it's just a very slight shift in perception between feeling anxiety and feeling excitement.
Well, and you can actually call it anxiety or excitement, right? We do this with our clients a lot. If you're saying, I feel so anxious, and when I go on a date and I'm sitting across from a guy and I don't know what to say or I don't know what to text him, I just go blank. Or you can say, I feel so excited to go on a date and I feel so excited to get a text from a guy. And even if I don't know what to say, it's exciting to put something out there and see what comes back. So sometimes just changing your dialogue
Yeah.
around this is very, very important. It can shift the whole, so you can shift your perception of how you're talking about it inside of yourself. And even that can start to shift how you're feeling.
Yeah. And let's say that you can't at that moment. It's just, that's when it's appropriate to say, I'm really nervous about, I've been looking forward to this, and I have to say, sitting across from him, I'm a little nervous because, I've been looking forward to this, and to get it out in the open, and because it will leave room for the guy to possibly say, yeah, I'm a little nervous too, and sharing that vulnerability you can build on that into something more vulnerable and more heart opening. Mm-hmm. So it could be a magical date rather than two people turning inward. Mm-hmm. So that could be magical.
Yeah.
And sometimes people are nervous or anxious because they don't know what to say, and so they'll default to interview questions. I often say when I was dating, I wish there was a credit card machine right in the center of the table. And, with the credit cards that have the magnetic stripe, and it just downloads all the superficial information, where I went to school, how many siblings I have, do I have a pet, are my parents alive, do I rent, do I own, all those things. So it just, gets out of the way in the first few moments, and you can have a real conversation. Mm-hmm. And so to have a real conversation, sometimes all it takes is being deeply curious about the person. A guy could say, well, you could say, how do you spend your day? And well, I'm an engineer. An engineer? That's fascinating. What do you work on? What projects? Well, I work on this. That is extraordinary. That sounds like it really, really is important for everyone. You have no idea how important, and rather than I'm an engineer, oh, that's cool. So having that deep curiosity can really bring out someone's aliveness and the aliveness in the date.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also it's very important for women to also, something I think that also brings up a lot of anxiety from a woman is that they're waiting for the man to ask them questions. And when a man doesn't ask any questions, they don't know what to share. Mm-hmm. And this is something very important because men, by and large, many men don't ask questions. And we don't sit around and wait for our girlfriends to say, well, what did he say? And what did you do? And how did this go? And whatever. There's just reciprocity. One person shares something, the other person, it's relational. Mm. And you just pick up on something. Oh, you went to Africa, last year on safari. And then you might share, gosh, I've never been on Africa. I've never been on safari in Africa, but my friends and I went to this place called the Bosque del Apache in New Mexico. And I can relate to what you're saying because that is the closest thing I've ever felt to being on safari in Africa. And it was right here in my own backyard in New Mexico. So you can share like that, and you don't need to have a man say, so have you ever been on safari? Right? You can be relational. And women, it's very important that we understand this and that we interject ourselves into the conversation, or a man will often just go on and on if a woman is insatiably curious and not ask questions and just keep talking about himself, assuming that you're interested and that he's fascinating. If a woman, one of the things is if a man is talking and talking and talking and a woman is sitting there and nodding. So another thing women need to know, and this is another big thing where you may be contributing to a man going on and on and on, is this. When women are listening to each other, and this is just a little sidebar tip, when we are in conversation and our friends are talking, we nod in agreement. I mean, not in agreement. We nod because we're listening. When men nod, they nod because they're in agreement with what you're saying. And so it's different behavior. So if you're listening as a woman and a man is going on and you're sitting there going like this, he thinks you're agreeing with him and that he is the most fascinating man on the planet. And so that's going to encourage him to keep talking and talking and talking. So you need to know these little things. And I'm just sharing that as a sidebar because that's, but this can be anxiety inducing for a woman because she's sitting there and she's nodding and she's being very interested and insatiably curious, but then the guy never asks her a question about himself.
Right. And at the end of the date, or after the date, she said all he did was sit there and talk about himself.
Right. Well, you were insatiably curious and you didn't interject anything. And you kept nodding your head. And the guy walked away thinking, oh my gosh, she was totally into me and she found me fascinating.
But he may not ask for a second date because it wasn't engaging.
Yeah.
Because he's told those stories before.
Yeah.
It was nothing new. There was nothing heart opening. There was not a special connection that happened.
Right. And another technique, something that we do that we often forget about, but that we teach our women, one of the ways you can bring yourself into the present moment is by going from a closed fist to an open hand, right? So when you're sitting under the table, one way is to feel your butt on the chair, to smell the smells, to be, looking into his eyes, to feel, aware of the romantic surroundings. But also you can make a fist. And if you're feeling tense and you want to get the energy, you want to open up your heart, you can make a fist and then very slowly, you don't go like that, but you very slowly let your hand open. And as you do that, you feel your heart expand. So that will bring you into your heart if you're up in your head.
And even a conscious breath, because we're breathing all day, all night, but seldom is it a conscious breath. So taking just a deep breath, letting everything go, and it just helps you drop into the present moment.
Yeah, we have a friend who actually did a talk for the women in one of our groups. Her name is Sita Rose. And one of the things I loved about Sita was the way she used her breath. She's a singer and a voice coach and a meditation coach. And one of the things that Sita Rose does is you'll be talking with her and Sita Rose will go, and it's just a showstopper. If you want to get a man's attention, and that will bring him into his heart. It will absolutely bring you into your heart, especially if you're feeling tense. And it doesn't have to be a quiet breath. It can be an actual...
Oh yeah, that gets my attention.
I'm sure it does. Yeah. So anxiety can push a man away. It can spiral out of control. We can overthink things. We can obsess, and not just on the date, but really after the date. Yeah. It's those text messages that I get from clients. What should I have done? And how should I have done it? And what do I say now? And what do you think of this message or that message? And I understand that they're coming to us for feedback, but this isn't a board game. There's not, always the next perfect move. There's not the perfect thing to say or do. It's really checking in with your own heart, listening to yourself, being able to close your eyes and clear your mind and have some space and not keep overthinking, well, what do I do and what do I say? In fact, one of the main tools we use, especially when the women are dating, is to have them dating several men at once and not focusing on just one guy so that they're overthinking what to say and do with that particular guy, but that they're also communicating with other men and they have several irons in the fire and they're not just fixating on that one guy, right? And still, that doesn't always do it. You know, they want to send that text, and if they don't get the response they want, then they want to cut them off or unmatch them and move on quickly, you know. And again, there's a feeling when someone wants to do that, that it's, well, I didn't get the response I wanted, so it can feel punishing or almost like controlling. I'll just cut that guy off and move on to the next one. But it's okay to give it some space, to wait a couple of weeks if you don't hear from him right away. He may be processing and trying to think about, you know, maybe you had a conversation, maybe things got out of control and you know, there was a little too much intimacy on a date and you felt that like you needed to slow things down. And then you had a conversation about, you know, I'm not rushing into anything. And then that gave him pause, you know, because then he's like, oh, all right, well, if I'm going to proceed with this particular woman, it's not just going to be go with the flow. This is a woman who has boundaries and whatever. And so then he stops and he says, well, you know, what do I want here? You know, this woman is clearly telling me what her boundaries are. I need a minute to think about this and regroup. So, you know, just let some of this be organic. There's got to be a flow to it. Give a man a little bit of a space, and no, men are not on the same timeline we are, right? And start to breathe. Date several men at once. And work with great coaches and mentors. You know, if I were going to say anything that I think makes the biggest difference of all, so many of the women out there are really trying to micromanage all of this and do this on their own. And there is nothing in the world that is more beneficial than working with mentors and coaches like us who can observe your behavior and almost in real time give you feedback about what to do and how to handle these things so that you can get there quicker. Doing it on your own, we're too close to the subject, right?
Yeah.
To be able to do this on our own.
Oh, yeah. And we'll default to the same skills that we had in junior high school, the same skills, the same projections, the same responses, all of that.
Well, and the more we try to do it on our own and the more we fail at it, the more disappointed we become in ourselves and the more anxious we become.
Right.
So it actually has the adverse effect. Oh, I just read this book on feminine energy, so I'm going to be more feminine. And that's going to solve it. But then you go out on the date and you're still insecure and you still don't feel like enough.
And if the date doesn't go anywhere, and if there are enough of those, one gets the idea that there aren't any good men out there.
Right.
Where the truth was that there weren't many quality dates along the journey.
Yeah. So reach out. Please go to lisashield.com. Watch my free 45-minute presentation. Keep watching our podcast. Oh, by the way, at the end of the presentation, if you feel that you qualify for a breakthrough call, you can sign up for a call to speak to either me or a member of my team about how we can help you manage your anxiety so you stop pushing men away. So please sign up for a call and consider working with us if you really want to get this solved. And keep watching our podcast. You can go to Apple or Spotify or Audible or anywhere you get your podcasts. Please send us your ideas for podcasts. You can send those to dwdpod@lisashield.com and let us.
DWD stands for Dating Without Drama.
Yeah, so I release 2 editions of this podcast each week. The one I do with Benjamin, Getting Inside the Right Male Mind, and also Lunch with Lisa. So both of those are terrific. So rate and like the podcast, and also sign up for my YouTube channel. There's many ways to follow me, and come back and see us again. And not only that, please tell your friends. So I'm Lisa Shield.
I'm Benjamin Shield.
And thank you so much for joining us.